Okay, everyone. Welcome back to Project Management. My name is Lisa Cunningham Roberts, and I'm with Organizational Learning. And I am delighted that Dr. Douglas Call is able to join us again. And as you may recall from last week, he has over 3 decades of executive leadership and project management experience in the pharmaceutical and aviation life support fields. He's currently the director with Harpum America, and is also an adjunct professor in the clinical research program at Campbell University. And additionally, in his past, Dr. Call has completed over 14 years with Quintiles in such roles as Executive Director of Global Learning and Development, Global Head of the Project Management Support Office, and Project Director on numerous clinical trials. He's authored many publications and has presented over 70 scientific and technical papers on project management, drug development, aviation, physiology, biomedical, and human factor engineering topics at national and international scientific symposia. So it is my pleasure to once again welcome Dr. Call.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I always wonder why we always have to write those things, but we do. Well, welcome, everyone. I remembered when I was starting to put this together, we didn't get through everything in the presentation last week about the ideal DCRI project leader. And I did want to spend a little bit of time going back over that. And let's have a show of hands. Say who was not here last week. Okay, good. We're going to pick up on this topic just a bit. Remember, we got through the presentations from the group, the 3 groups, and the 3 groups reported on the characteristics of the ideal DCRI project leader from a project management competencies point of view. And these characteristics, as you will remember, we broke them down into 3 general areas. Project management expertise, PM process skills, knowing how to be a PM, doing what it takes to manage a project, the professional project management skills. And since this is an academic research organization, a very strong part is drug development knowledge. Your scientific clinical skills, what you know about the disease area you're working in, allowing you to make the right decisions, talk the same language as the PI, talk with the sites, etc., help the CRAs. And then last, and who knows which is the most important, but you certainly can't do without leadership ability, you are the CEO of a small or large business, depending on if you're Republican or Democrat, I guess. And you are responsible for how that project goes. And despite what I've heard about how wonderful your financial systems are, you are also responsible for the finances of this project. So those 3 areas, and then remember we had group presentations on these 3 areas, and the 3 spokespersons were Corey, Lisa, and Jennifer, who did that. And here are what those 3 groups put. Let's see, Corey, this was yours. Which one? Leadership? All right. Can you read it from there? Do you remember it?
Effective communication, exhibit integrity and trustworthiness, motivate, recognize, and reward, build effective relationships across external and ability to facilitate course corrections.
Course corrections in the project to keep the project where it's supposed to be. I made the analogy last week between managing a project and flying in formation. This is where you're supposed to be. This is where you are. Your job is to try to keep them as close together. It's perhaps not quite as critical in a project as it is in flying formation at 200 or 300 knots, but results can be dramatic either way if you're not together. Now, first one then, project management expertise. The other 2 speakers, Leslie or Jennifer. Either of them here? Yes. Remember that one? You read it from here? All right, come on up. I didn't think so. This is on. Okay. So project management expertise, the skills that it takes.
This is develop clear, concise project plan and communication and escalation plan. Develop, manage, and communicate timelines, effective meeting management. Develop, manage scope of work and budget. Understand cross-functional processes, risk management, contingency planning, understanding EPM and forecasting, audit readiness, a QC plan, create, manage efficiencies.
Okay. These are all of the characteristics. By the way, for those of you that were not here last week, the way we came up with this, we broke the group across into 3 groups and had them do this as a group and then rank them. So they had way more than this. And this was probably the top 5 or top 8 or so. And the last one, scientific and clinical background. All right.
We ranked it. We had a whole bunch listed, and we put them in groups. And the first one that came up prioritized scientific background, and then the therapeutic area experience was next on the priority list, and then having kind of loud anyway. Clinical research and GCP knowledge and experience was the third, and then the fourth skill was ability to effectively communicate and mentor.
And mentor, extremely important. We didn't talk much about that one. That is a topic we'll be covering a bit today. Okay, thanks a lot. Now, I then sort of summarized this. And this was supposed to there. Common traits of an effective DCRI project leader. And I used several sources for this, some of which you talked about, some of what I saw from other presentations at DCRI, and then some I sort of made up. And some of them, my wife Susan Warwick helped me with some of these. So here's what we came up with. Manage in a matrix. Responsibility without control. It's always going to be that way. That's how drug development is done. You really can't get away from it. A good delegator who motivates and empowers team. Probably one of the hardest things to do. It's part of leadership, but delegating is absolutely essential to truly take advantage of what the team knows and to free you as the project leader up for doing what you're supposed to be doing if you're a lead CRA, to free you up to have a higher picture of what's going on rather than getting too deeply involved. Coordinating the efforts of the DCRI team, sponsor, contract CRAs, and other contractors, CROs, labs, etc. A lot of coordination. Of course, the ability to work efficiently with the Duke PI, very important. And the ability to navigate the Duke system, know how to get things done, know what systems work, which ones don't work, who can help you with things. Basically, it's the intelligence of how the organization works, and that's when the experience really helps. And if you are new to it, but you do have some experienced people on the team, be sure to take advantage of them. And there usually is a gatekeeper somewhere around who knows how to get things done. It's good to know those gatekeepers. Focused, organized, flexible, and persistent. A thick skin with a good sense of humor. That really helps because the skin will help you from a lot, and certainly a good sense of humor is necessary. And then great enthusiasm for job despite the stress. It's going to happen. Now, all of these are great, and I think it's worthwhile to spend a few minutes that we didn't talk about project management competencies and how to become a better project leader. This is a slide that is taken from this competency dependency framework that I talked about last week. And what it's designed to show is these are the three areas we talked about: process knowledge, personal competence, of course, is leadership, and performance competence, in your case, would be the scientific technical knowledge, and where you are today and where you want to be, and then how are you going to get there. I mentioned just briefly that within these competency frameworks, there are checklists on standard competencies in those three areas, three major areas, and you can use those as guidelines for how comfortable you are with areas you need to know more about those. And it's a good place to start. In fact, at Harvard Consulting, when we come into an organization and help them look at their project management operation, we do a gap analysis, how things are going compared to where they want to be. Again, the projected versus actual. It always comes down to the people. How are the people doing? And then one of the things we often do is help the leadership and training people do some individual counseling with the people, or we work with them themselves, and we have some checklists that we use that perhaps are easier to use than some of these ones from the competency frameworks to help people assess where they are. Going back to that slide, the goal, how are you going to get there? And this one happens to come from the Association for Project Management. They look quite similar. And this then is the steps: perform the self-assessment, then develop a professional development plan. I would predict that all of you have professional development plans. Human Resources sometimes requires them as part of annual reviews. Most organizations, people are too busy to do much about it. And so it comes down to the individual deciding, we're going to implement this thing, and I'm going to get better at what I do, and I'm going to get promoted, etc. So how do you do this? Several ways: informal learning on the job. You certainly have plenty of chance to learn on the job. Sometimes things seem to go way too fast, and you have people reporting to you. I did hear mentoring as part of the skills here, able to communicate effectively and to mentor. If you don't have a formal mentorship program, it's nice to get one going. And if you're involved in one, having a mentee or more is very good for you, because it makes you focus on being that good example and doing some preparing for these sessions. Then formal training, lots of project management leadership classes. Duke is very good at providing classes. There are a lot of good things here in the triangle that are available to you. Online training courses, self-study books, journals, PM websites, and the end of this section of the lecture, I have a group of them listed for you, and then participating in professional organizations. And here are these references that I used for this. You're certainly welcome to come up and take a look at these after the session. This book I talked about, very, very good book on project management. I think partly the reason I like it is there are a lot of pictures. But under the pictures are some very, very good things. Project management is about people. You have to deal with all kinds of stakeholders. How do I know I have a problem? What is normal performance? If no existing strategy is acceptable, you may have to invent one. And here's one. It's incredibly hard to make up for lost time on a project. There are a few quotations that I remember from that, something about in project timelines. Why is it that time gained is never accumulated on a timeline, but time lost is always? Always seems to be that way. So, getting back to the one before, participating in professional organizations. The Project Management Institute has North Carolina chapter, and I think I told you last week I was president of that a few years ago, 2000, 2001. And they have then subgroups that meet. The one that's probably most applicable to your interest and knowledge would be the pharmaceutical special interest group. They tend to meet second Wednesdays of the month. And it's in RTP, very close to the airport, a place called Matrix Resources. But the schedule for all of them is at ncpmi.org. They're very, very interesting programs. They're a good way to interact with other project managers from the pharmaceutical field, and I really highly recommend it. We started that. I was one of the forming members of that. We hosted it at Quintas for several years. I think it's been around for about 10 years now. So, and then professional organizations, Pete Harperman and I have been very active, he in Europe, me in the U.S., in DIA. In fact, I just learned yesterday that I'm going on Monday to Argentina for 4 days to present a workshop on risk management there. Pete was scheduled to do it at Latin American Congress of Clinical Research, sponsored by DIA. So instead of enjoying the nice sunshine this weekend, I have to put together a workshop for 8 hours, but that's all right. I've done that before. So references, rest of them here. And as I said, we won't spend any more time on those. Let's move on to the topic. Well, just a few words about the websites, EIA. Some of you, I'm sure, are members. PMI, North Carolina chapter. The Lewis Institute. Jim Lewis has his own website. A lot of good stuff on there. PM Forum and PM World Today are probably two of the best project management websites. A lot of good papers in there. Sort of newsletters of project management that really work into this project management expertise part. And then we actually have several white papers on our website that have been written over the years about project management topics. Okay, I plan to do that in 15 minutes, and we're really right on schedule. Any questions before we move on? Virtual teams is what we're talking about today. Virtual teams. Team members are not co-located and use communication technology to work across space, time, etc. Well, I learned in some of my interviews that Duke is not quite as, DCRI is not quite as virtual as a lot of organizations, and a lot of the projects that you do that are global, you tend to work with other CROs, pharma companies, etc. But you still, if you're in that area, you are going to be able to use a lot of what we're going to be talking about in the next hour and a half or so. But then, virtual doesn't necessarily mean I'm on the other side of the globe, because you all know that if you're in another building, you might as well be on the other side of the globe, because you've just missed the last van that's going over there. There's no place to park when you get there if you drive, so I guess I won't go. So you miss that opportunity for face-to-face communication. It happens all the time. And people sometimes forget the importance of that. Lisa, how is it going now that you've moved downtown? Besides, you have more places for lunch.
It's going well, but it does require being really thoughtful about how you communicate.
Yep. Okay, we're going to talk more about that. But virtual teams are the way we live and work in the global drug development industry, and not just that. Just try to get something done on your computer. Or just try to talk to Time Warner Cable. I switched to Time Warner Business class this summer. What a goat rope. It's just incredible. You know the term goat rope? I spent a lot of time in the West Navy, and when I was stationed in the Navy, and very often ropers use goats to practice on. Why is that? No, they move fast, and they turn. Well, Time Warner Cable does that. They turn and transfer you to somebody else. Then you have to tell them the same thing again, and again, and again, and again. Well, it's not completely done, but, well, almost as much fun as Dell computers. But I have found, since I have several friends and colleagues here from India that work, when I talk to the people in India, I usually say two things. One of my favorite countries, I've been there 11 or 12 times. And two, what's your real name? It's not Peggy. Okay. This is what we're going to try to do. Discuss the growth of virtual teams, gain a better understanding of the common challenges facing virtual teams. And I haven't talked about home-based employees. Any home-based people in the room? Okay. Another completely different topic, but we're going to talk a lot about it because you need to know about this. You need to know how it is to work with people that way. Share some ideas on communication technologies, and then talk about winning trust, commitment of virtual teams, and then some techniques to improve email communications. Now, I thought it'd be worthwhile to tell you a bit about how I got this information. One, personal experience. I was a global project manager for a lot of years. I was a global PM on a cardiovascular trial a few years ago. We had, 430 sites in 23 countries and enrolled 12,000 patients. Had about 500 people on the team globally. It was a great project. I still am in close contact with lots of those people from 10 years ago. I was a global head of technical training and also head of the global project office. So I did a lot of travel, a lot of global travel, working with teams as they were moving global. Quotations is a global company and relies very heavily on technology. And then this spring, January, February, I did an informal email survey of 70-plus professionals, colleagues and friends who I've known over the years, who I know work globally in CROs, pharma, AROs, and gave them a list of questions. And I had excellent results. I think I had 61 people responded out of 72 I sent them to with their responses. And I did some interviews with DCRI personnel the last couple of months, and then lots of reference books, which you'll see up here. This is a survey I was talking about, and this is where the people were located: U.S., Canada, Mexico, Argentina, U.K., and then in the Far East, India, Eastern Europe, etc. Now, I don't plan to go over all of these, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a look at the range of questions that we ask and how they apply to your situation. What's your greatest challenge working? What communication mode have you found to be the most effective? What technique do you use to schedule telecons, vidcons, so that everyone is sort of equally inconvenienced? How do you keep all team members engaged during team meetings? A challenge for everyone, for sure. What's your greatest challenge working with virtual PMs? What communication mode is the most useful? What technique do you use to schedule and how do you keep all team members engaged? Oh, I see. I'm reading the same one twice. Two screens. Value of face-to-face kickoff meetings. What's your experience with cultural differences on the teams? How that affects? Any thoughts on managing conflict? And then any case studies you could use. Now, I summarized them here. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them because we're going to be spending the rest of the time really focusing on some of these things. But here is what's your greatest challenge working with a virtual team, serving as a virtual manager or being a remote project manager or team member? Communication. 70% of the people said communication. And the next highest number was building trust in the leadership and motivating the team. That is dispersed that way. And then the way I've set this up is I've summarized some of the answers here. Communication. We spend too much time in telecons, too many emails from too many people. Dropping down to this one, we spend so much time trying to make our fancy communication systems work. Why don't you just pick up the phone and call me? Team members' performance is closely related to identity with others on the team. And communication mode, most popular audio telecons with web-based telecons. WebEx, what do you use? Adobe Connect. GoToMeeting, they all have about the same capabilities. Personal phone calls, great team builders. Email, don't overuse. Instant messaging, great for quick issues and ask specific questions during telecons. Any of you use instant messaging much as part of your email, right? A creative mix of all modes. By the way, VidCons were not very popular, too complex. And the home-based people tend to hate them. As they often said, we have to get dressed and comb our hair if we're going to have a VidCon. One of the technologies that I'm surprised isn't used much, and I don't know if it has to do with security. How many of you use Skype with your team? Only one. Tell us about it. How do you use it, and who do you use it with?
I use it with regional group.
Okay.
So the project is sort of global, or was global. We're finished now, but I would have sort of operational calls with one of the CROs that we have in Australia, and we would use Skype.
Okay. Are you based here? Yes. All right. And to work well for you?
Yes. Yeah. My contact over there, we liked it. It was early there and late here.
Oh yes.
So we got the best of each.
I remember years ago when I was on that project, that's actually 10 years ago, long before all the technology we had. We had meetings on Tuesday morning, and I used to get up at 4. Meetings at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, so I could catch the most people. And I forgot now, Australia, how many hours? 16 hours?
She was 13 and a half.
13 and a half.
Or 12 and a half, depending on.
Better yet. And because the team member in New Zealand is how much? The same? Or 1 more hour?
I think it's, I would guess it was one.
Okay.
There's a 1 hour difference.
What I'm getting to is that you used to lead these teleconferences at 4 or 5. Sometimes it varied depending on the time of the year. And we always used to joke, the woman in New Zealand and I would joke that we probably were in more comfortable clothes than the rest of the people who were between us going through Europe, Eastern Europe, India, and Australia. So I've always been kind of surprised that Skype is not used anymore. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Is Skype able to, can you run conference calls? Like many different.
Yep. I mean, we use Skype almost exclusively from our office in the UK. The prices, of course, you can't do it all free if you're doing conference calls and calling over the world, etc., because they got to make some money somehow. But it's remarkably cheap as compared to other communication systems. And we use it a lot, and the utility is good, I must say. Although last night I was talking to Managing Director Pete Harpham. It was 9 o'clock his time and 5 for me. We talked for about an hour and a half, and during that, he's the one that got sick and gave me that workshop to do. And during that time, I think we lost connection twice, but then right back on again. Worked perfectly. Okay, technologies. They work well. What's your experience with cultural differences? Any of you worked on multicultural teams? Anything to say about that? Go ahead.
I met a team in Korea, West Korea, in a central location, and I understand that when you're when you're exchanging business cards, you look at the business card and admire it, and kind of it's a presentation of them, an extension of them. So you have to really.
Did you present it like this?
I believe so. Yeah.
All right. Very good.
The extension of that I learned having been in Korea recently. It's not just the presentation of the business card, but I went to a lot of meetings where you would do a lunch meeting or you would go to a presentation. Not only would they give you the card and you would admire it, but you didn't dare put it away until that meeting or lunch was over.
And you didn't write on it.
It became an issue with traditional Korean food because there's dishes everywhere, and you're like, where am I supposed to put these cards? But I can't put them away.
And you can't write on it.
No, they would write on them, actually.
Good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Oh, you got one. Good. I think it's on.
The thing that I've come across is I'm working with a Japanese company, and there's definitely gender. So if I'm speaking, it's not necessarily heard well, versus if a male says the same thing, it's heard better. So
sometimes happens in the U.S. South.
Agreed. I think they're adapting. So I've learned that in order for me to communicate with the opposite, it's more to have someone else speak first. That would make them listen and then interject a word. That would like a keyword or two that I want to really get across. So
you have to be a ventriloquist, isn't it?
In a way.
Yeah, a lot of interesting things culturally now with Japan. Any of you worked on with Japanese teams on projects? Go ahead.
Well, I used to have a sponsor, so
Yep.
I didn't have a team. But
Yep.
it was a really interesting experience. And they actually had a U.S. affiliate, so we worked through them a lot. And I don't think it's insulting, but they had this term window person, and that was who interfaced with Japan.
No, that's a very common term.
It was interesting to me to see that work.
Yep.
And everything had to run over and come back. So there was always, if it was a big decision, it took a long time because it had to escalate and then go over and then be consulted and then brought back. So.
I've seen the window person used in Eastern Europe as well, and even in Central Europe, in Germany. Did you work with Japanese enough that you were able to figure out that hi does not always mean yes? It sometimes means hi, I heard you. Hi, yes, I understand. And I'm not sure there are at least 6, and I don't know total languages, versions of hi. They all mean yes, but it doesn't mean, yes, of course, I'll do that and get it to you when you ask. They mean lots of things.
Yeah, we had a weekly call for a little while, actually, with a person in Japan on sort of the Japanese side, and I definitely remember a lot of kind of checking with him to make sure he understood, what we were asking of him or how soon it needed to be done, and it was also very early his time because these calls were sort of mid-morning, I think, U.S., so he was sort of, sleepy-eyed and kind of trying to figure out where he was, but because he would sort of affirmatively respond, you could hear, but it wasn't always clear that he was affirming that he had an action or more that he understood because of the language barrier.
Exactly right.
Our counterparts in the U.S. were actually very good because they had a better sense of that, and they would reinforce things that needed to be done rather than just understood. So
without interrupting, right?
Right.
Or without here's a survey. How many of you complete other people's sentences? Okay. Give her the mic. We're going to do a little test.
No, it's a bad thing.
I know it's bad, but I do it.
Well, all right. Now look around. Raise your hands again. How many of you complete other people's sentences? All right. Okay. Why do you do it?
I think, honestly, I think it's a lack of self-control. I'm serious. I'm being very honest. I understand that it's respectful and I get ahead of myself, and I want so desperately to make sure that my point is heard while they're still on their point, while they're still thinking about it. But I understand that. Oops, sorry.
Would you roll in the couch? I think we may need it here.
Say what now?
I asked her to roll in the couch. We may need it.
I'll roll in the couch. I'm sorry, it's Friday.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you. Context. Let me talk about context. We're going to get to it in a minute. Context in communication is extremely important because we always interpret what we hear, what we read, based upon where we are, our context. And going back, I'm sure you had this in probably Psychology 101 about communication. The person thinks of a message. They send the message, either verbally or by electronic means or whatever. The receiver receives the message. They then have to decode, is the term used in psychology. And those of you that speak several languages, you know how it is. You decode. Well, how you decode a message depends upon your context, where you live, what that word means, what that English word means, what that English phrase means. And by the way, slang phrases, almost impossible to decode sometimes in other languages. I've been learning Spanish for several years, and I can get by okay. But watching movies, I sometimes watch Spanish movies when I'm, especially Mexican movies. They're really hard to decode because if they're made in Mexico City, there's a very specific Chilango dialect in Mexico. Very difficult to understand. So context of where people are receiving the message is extremely important. Now, go back to your confession.
That's what it is. Oh, what else? Yeah, what else do y'all want to know? I think that's it.
And how do people respond to your completing the sentences?
Not well. And usually once I do it, then I remember, okay, I really need to not do that.
Where are you from?
I'm actually 50-50, New England, North Carolina now. I moved down here when I was about 16.
Okay, from where in New England?
Connecticut and New Hampshire.
I see. Yesterday I was talking to the travel agent on this trip. She was in Philadelphia. She kept interrupting me all the time. And I...
Oh, yeah.
No, that really isn't what I wanted to do. And bidding the conversation, I said, you're from Philadelphia, aren't you? Well, yes. No, she said, yeah. I said, I could tell. And she said, well, how can you tell? I said, two ways. One, I was stationed in Philadelphia for 4 years. And two, you've interrupted almost everything I've said. But I said it in a very, very good-natured way. And she said, oh, I'm sorry. But that's just how we are sometimes. Go ahead.
My wife says, let me finish.
She does.
That's her statement.
And I noticed that Mitt Romney said the same thing to his opponent the other day. Go ahead.
I had a boss that I worked with for 10 years, and I got to know her so well. I did, unfortunately, start finishing sentences, but I was finishing them correctly. And so I was thinking, I was getting her point, and so she didn't even have to finish it. So I was like, so this is what you want me to do? Yeah. And then I ran along.
That's good. It works within the culture. Be careful cross-cultures. Two things I'll share with you. One, to follow up with what you said. I had a boss a few years ago. He was therapeutic head, vice president, very enthusiastic guy, big, really, really big, muscular, kind of imposing guy with a big black beard, long hair, and just really sort of dominated. He had a big booming voice, and he would complete people's sentences, but in a very unusual kind of way. No, you start to say something to me.
Hello, sir. Nice to meet you.
Now wait.
Oh,
now wait. He would throw this gesture into conversations. And I like how you responded. Yes. You're nothing. And I was one of the older guys in the group. That happens a lot in the last few years. And I was a senior director at the time, and I was sort of a confidant, if you will, to lots of people. And, they would come and talk to me about this, that many of the junior people were really afraid to talk to him much. And he was very much of a walking around kind of management guy. Really great guy, extremely, extremely bright. But he was always in such a hurry that he would do this sort of to get on to the topic. And then he would indeed sort of complete their sentence. As he was saying this, he would then complete their sentence of what he thought they were going to say. And so I decided, my office is right next to him, I'm going to do, and he came running into my office all the time. He, thinking about the three parts, PM expertise, scientific leadership was his weak part. And I was fairly recently out of the Navy captain, and he had great respect for that. He went to a military school, and he decided, he came to me for leadership tips all of the time. And when he started to do this, I thought, he just ain't going to get it. If I say, wait, you do that all the time, don't do that. He won't get it. So what I started to do, when I rehearsed this a bit, is when he would come in and he would do that, then people's jokes would stop, and then he would finish the sentence. I then decided I'm going to let him do this, and then I will finish the sentence in the most ridiculous way after he says it. We would be talking about something on a project, and he would do this, and then he would give his ending, and then I would say, and the bird on the bird feeder is a cardinal. And I don't think the sun will be out today. Or, did you see the hockey game last night? I would just throw these in. And he usually would sort of do this. And I think it was the second day when I did that, he just stopped. Doug, what in the hell are you doing? And I thought, got him. And I said, I won't say the name. Boss, what in the hell are you doing? And that's how I got him. Oh, I don't do that. Yes, you do. Let me tell you a little bit. I went over and kicked the door shut. We had a talk. Maybe we called it a counseling session. Did he get better? Yes. Are you better yet? Not yet. He did get better a lot because he was really embarrassed by it. And he indeed did not realize that he did this. So we got off the topic of context a bit, but we're talking about communication, talking about people from different cultures and how important it is. Go ahead.
I had a question. I have a conference call every 2 weeks with India, and I realized that after each agenda item, if I don't make some recognition that I've heard it, there's like this pause of silence until we can't move to the next agenda item. And it's mostly them telling us about the update of all our sites in India. And I didn't catch on at first, and I thought, I have to really make some
Excellent.
Acknowledgement.
Excellent. Are you doing it now?
Oh, yes,
Good.
because there's, we want to keep moving.
One other thing which I'm sure you know about working with Indian people, and we have two validators sitting here. It's difficult for an Indian professional to sometimes say no in public, in profession, when they should be able to do it. But there is something that's going on that's not going to allow them to do it. They have a hard time saying no.
I'm not a real Indian.
Yeah, I know that. You're from Jersey. Remember last week? You're from Jersey. And how old were you when you came?
I do agree with you about this.
Yeah.
I think that I have experienced it myself when I worked in India, and for most of them, the way they view it is, if your boss has told you to do something, you got to do it. That's
right.
That's how I think that's how it's seen. That's why they can't say no.
Exactly right. Context, cultural, extremely important. Okay, very good discussion. I like this one. If you want a non-native English speaker to report on something, a non-native English speaker, ask them in advance so they can do a little time preparing. Extremely important. I'll be doing the same next week when I'm walking around with my group. I will prepare what I'm going to say in Spanish. I mean, they all speak excellent English, but they're always very happy to speak to them in Spanish. I will think a bit about what I'm going to say when I come to the group in advance, and it will help. Okay, now, here are some of the things that happened in my discussion with virtual teams from DCRI Interviews. Number one challenge of virtual teams is running effective team meetings. We just heard about this. I make building trust among my team members an absolute priority. You got to build trust so that people will do the hard work. And one of the ways to build trust is do what you said you would do, preferably when you said you were going to do it. Yep.
This is a question in more of even within your team members that are U.S. based and you're working across offices or working across cross-functional. Though you have a tendency or may have a tendency to follow through on your word and do what you say, the other is not reciprocating. So how, in that respect, can you build trust across functional groups?
With team members that are not necessarily coming across?
Yeah, in the same manner.
In the way of getting things done on time with quality, etc.?
Correct.
All right. First thing I would suggest is look at their situation. How many teams are they on? Are they spread across several teams? Do they really have time to do what they need to do? First step may well be to talk to their line manager to find out how committed are they. What is their probable reason for not being able to do it? Are there things in their context, in their situation that you don't know about? I would do this, I would get this information first, if possible. Then talk to them one-on-one, if they're here, face-to-face, if they're not, on the phone. Never put it in an email, because email is always one click away from the CEO, right? So never, I made that a priority years ago when I first started using emails. Never ever put things into email that you don't want forwarded, because they will be sometimes. And so I'd have that conversation with them personally after you find the framework and see why. And then, as part of the conversation, ask why. What do you need? How can I help? But don't let it go on. We'll get into that section a bit more when we talk about trust. Does that help, Dib? Mm-hmm. Other suggestions in the group? Okay.
Doug, I'd just add a plug for talking about impact,
mm-hmm.
impact of their behavior. I mean, certainly do it in respectful terms, but
as part of that conversation.
Yeah, of them not completing their deadline. What is again, it goes back to context. So what's the bigger
We're going to talk in a few minutes about affinity distance and operational distance, etc. And I will bring it up. Thanks, Lisa. You can't leave, this is for managers, you can't leave your virtual people to their own devices. You need to go see them. Talk more about that. DCRI as an organization is not very virtual worker friendly at present. I heard this several times. This must change as more people go virtual. I also heard from some of the leadership that DCRI is going to be going more virtual. Space is expensive, technology works, and there will be more people virtual. Now, how many CRAs do we have, or CRA managers? In-house? How many of your people are virtual, or only contractors are virtual?
I have 3 that will be virtual. I have 3 that will be.
The 3 will be virtual, okay? So I'm not lying here. Okay, and why are they going virtual? Space, okay? It's going to happen. So get good at it. Get better at it. It doesn't happen overnight. I like this one. After 1.5 years of working remotely, I now realize that all of our sponsors are remote. So I know how they feel. They don't get the word. Very, very good. That's one of the best quotations in this entire presentation as far as I'm concerned. And I manage contract CRAs better since I'm remote, because I know what they go through. Now, living the virtual life. This is how it is when I'm sort of living it now. My Harp from America Inc. is my 22 by 25 upstairs bedroom. It happened to be one of those bonus rooms, and now it's bonused into a Harp from America Inc. It houses lots of books, my couple of computers and workspace, and most importantly, an elliptical exerciser and a TV to watch Mexican movies when I'm doing it. But it's a mess sometimes, but I've learned a whole lot about making computer systems work and unjamming the damn printer and these kinds of things, because I've been doing it now virtually for a couple of years. So travel, feeling lonely, odd hours, incredible hours, sleeping close to your BlackBerry, and I like this one. This came up in an interview. I used to clip the BlackBerry to my pajama bottoms, but I'm better now. I like that. Okay, the New World. If I were going to recommend any book for you to get to know about virtual world and working that way, there are two of them here by this woman, Karen Sobol-Lojewski. Really excellent, very timely. They're up to date. This was 2008, this was 2009. Uniting the virtual workforce and then leading the virtual workforce. And she really does a very, very nice job of looking at how it is to really work verbally. First part there, technology today has created an entirely new kind of work life, often indistinguishable from our non-working life. Proximity, time zones, distance can now be managed well. Perhaps. Positive result, we can work anytime from any place. Negative result, we can work anytime from any place. And I like this quotation as well. During an interview, one person shared the following. This is what my husband often says to me. Okay, it's real. It's everywhere. Let's talk about these challenges of the virtual workplace. And here is how this author talks about it, and I've seen these elsewhere. I just want to be checked to see exactly where we are, that we're covering everything. Okay? Yep, we're on schedule. Well, here's what this author says, and it's the book I just mentioned to you, what she says about it. 3 important challenges of the virtual workforce. And you can call it the person or the team member workforce, general term. Physical distance, operational distance, and affinity distance. Some of these we've talked about by some of your excellent comments. Geographic distance, very straightforward. We know about that. We are separate. Maybe miles, maybe thousands of kilometers. Temporal time zone. I heard someone in the back. Tell me again your name, Bart. You. Bart, is that your name? Yeah. When you're talking about working with the Japanese team, and you talked about their the time zone difference and what time of day were they reading these and how alert they really were, etc. That's what they mean here by physical distance and time zone difference, because we need to get people together. Then everybody's not in absolutely the same physical, psychological condition to receive and send. And then the last one, this organizational distance as a challenge. You know what's going on at DCRI because you're here. You're in the hallways. You come down and get coffee. sit out here in I forgot what they call it, the atrium area, and you run into people in elevators. You catch up. When you're working virtually, you don't. You don't know what's going on. You miss things, like politics, sometimes good, right? But you don't really know what's going on, and sometimes you don't have the information that you need to function as well as you could. So if you're a leader, you're a manager, be sure people get to know what's going on. That's the physical distance. Operational distance. Communication distance, well, that's very straightforward. We understand that. Has to do with, does the technology work? Are we using the right one? Steve might appreciate this, although he is Air Force oriented. The analogy that she uses in this book, I can't completely agree with because I've been there, and that is she talks about being a leader on a virtual teleconference with people from all over the world is like landing an aircraft on a carrier at night. And what she says is, and she gets this from people that she knows that have been in the military, it's completely black. You don't see the people. You know they're there, but sometimes you can hear their breathing if they happen to be on hot mic, sort of like being in the backseat of a jet aircraft landing on a carrier. You know they're there because they're waiting for your affirmation that they've reported. That here you're trying to drive this teleconference and you don't have the audio cues, you don't have the visual cues, etc. Well, the other thing that you don't have on a teleconference, and I'm here to tell you it's the truth, when you come around and you make that last turn, and there's the carrier and there's some lights in the teleconference, and you're going to be landing on this thing, you're going to be going 180 miles an hour, and in 100 feet, you're going to be going to 0 miles an hour. You never, ever, when you're leading a teleconference, have the same pucker factor that you do in that airplane. I'll tell you that for sure. Just not quite the same. So that's the only thing I read in her book that I didn't agree with. But communication distance. Multitasking. We all are multitasking, so we're not focusing on what's going on. And we do it all the time in teleconferences, for sure. Readiness distance. I like this. The virtual person has to rely a lot on their own devices in making things work. They're not close to IT. They're not close to support. They're not close to copy centers, etc. They got to do it on themselves. So the readiness depends upon themselves. And then the affinity distance, this is the part she talks about a lot, has to do with establishing the kinds of personal relationships that really make things easy when you're working together. You don't have the opportunity for that. We've talked about cultural and social distance a bit, so I won't mention that. But she talks a lot about affinity distance, and then she puts it together in this diagram with the focus here on the virtual distance. Physical distance we've talked about. Affinity distance, operational distance leads to this virtual distance that you have to deal with as a leader of a virtual team or as a leader of or as a manager of people who work virtually. You getting all this for your next 3 CRAs? Good. So this equation then, project leader or the manager's job is to be aware of this and think about these parts that I gave you that affect this red part. What can you do to make it easier for them to operate with this affinity distance? Enemies of virtual team members. The first book that I ever read on virtual teams was this one by Jacqueline Costner, who was the author, published in 1994. I bought it in 1997. It's interesting. I bought this in Gatwick Airport, London, coming back from a meeting of my European and South African lead CRAs and project managers, etc., on a global trial. And I read the book on the way back, and it just completely changed my thoughts about how I needed to be a leader. And what this is about, this is an allegory that she writes this story in an allegory, a story about this project manager based in Atlanta. His name is Jim. He had just been in Europe for a meeting of his virtual team, and guy in the room that
I'll give you that.
will tell us that. Okay.
I might check your desk.
You want me to take it off and you can check the battery?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me unwind it here. Okay. So this coin that he dropped in his pocket when the first service was coming through and the flight attendant was serving drinks, back when they did, he happened to have pulled out that coin and was looking at it. And the flight attendant was British, and she said, "Where did you get that coin?" He said, I just made a phone call in a phone kiosk, and it dropped out. She said, "No, you didn't." I said, "Well, yes, I did. That's where I got the coin." I said, "Well, that's pretty unusual because that is a very old, very valuable coin." And he was looking at it, and he said, "Do you know who that is on there?" Dumb American, what do you know? No. He says, "Well, that's King Arthur. King Arthur, who united the tribes of England and our first king of England." Dropped it back in his pocket. Later in the flight, he was back in the bathroom, and he decided he would take a look at the coin again. So he got it out, looked at it, rubbed it a bit, and when he rubbed it, no, a genie didn't pop out, but King Arthur appeared in the mirror. The rest of the story is about, it's coming on. It was about his interactions with Arthur in the next month, how he learned to be a better project manager by learning what King Arthur taught him about how he united all of the tribes of England into one group as the Knights of the Round Table. And it sounds silly, but it was really a fun book because he would carry a mirror in his pocket or in his briefcase, and when he had tough times, he would pull out the mirror because he could only see Arthur if he had a mirror, because Arthur would appear in the mirror, either in the rearview mirror of his car or in a bathroom or his makeup mirror if he pulled it out. There it is. There's, "Hey, Art, how am I doing?" kind of thing. And it really is an excellent book talking about what he learned about managing virtual teams by what King Arthur taught him. And here's what Jacqueline Costner says about the three enemies of virtual teams. Remember, she wrote this in 1994, and really applies today. She said, this is why virtual teams have a hard time working. You'll see a lot of similarities to what we've been talking about. Geography makes the team members see themselves as separate from one another. Well, we just talked about that. Physical distance. Isolation keeps team members from knowing each other, seeing how all their activities interrelate, and building trust within the group. We talked about that. Operational distance. History. I like this one. Team members tend to do things the way they've done them in the last project since they have no history with this team. When I was getting the project management office, global project management office going at Quintiles, the one thing that was our biggest challenge was to get rid of all of the forms that everybody used from their last project that did not interrelate with what they were doing now, and you couldn't take their data from one form, etc. Some of you know about that, right? Okay. Didn't have a history with the last term, so we then got some standard forms and really forced people to use them, so at least we would be that much together. Then culture. We talked about this, culture perspective. We talked about context. Well, this is what Jacqueline Costner wrote in this book. A fun book. I probably read the thing at least 3 or 4 times over the last several years, and I really learned a lot. One of the things she talks about in there is you need to bring people together, because knights who know each other don't kill each other. Somebody asked me a question a minute ago about performance. Dib? Trust.
I feel you're building trust, and then the trust is reciprocated. How do you work on building that trust back to, having the team members trust you? Even though you've said and done what you said you were going to do, but the trust is still not there. What are other ways to kind of build on those trusts?
One simple thing I learned a long time ago, let's say after I left the Navy, when you're in the Navy, there's no problem getting people to do what you want them to, right? Okay. But when you're doing a virtual team, responsibility without control, you always got to deal with this. Some of you know it. WIIFM. It's the radio station that everybody is tuned to in their head all of the time. Even if the iPod is there. The primary radio station is WIIFM. What's in it for me? And you've got to get past that. You've got to find what is in it for that team member. And if it means talking to their line manager and giving them a bit of an administrative boost, you got to do it. Because you cannot have this person's lack of trust and their performance affect the rest of the team. Because we've got a timeline to meet. Simple as that. Nothing personal, but we've got to. What do you call it in HR? A letter in the record, a counseling session, do else, that kind of thing.
Okay, I didn't know if it was like give them a raise and here you can live up to this now, or no, that's not the right way to do it.
She's very positive though. I like that. No, I was just being an officer and a gentleman. That was a gentleman part when I said administrative boost. Okay.
Do you have any team building exercises that
Yes.
can be done virtually?
Yes.
Any you can share?
I'd have to think about them a bit, but there is a book by Glenn Parker. Look at www.glennparker, GLENN, Parker.com. Do you know Glenn Parker? Very good. He's been doing this stuff for years. There's also an Indian guy by the name of, he's from South India and he has a very long name. Tyagi, yes. If you know his, I like some of his stuff even better. Thiagi, Tyagi.com. And I can confirm this for you. Tyagi is his nickname because he's from Chennai. It's a very long name. Almost sure that's right. Does that look right to you, Lisa? It does, yeah. Tyagi.com. I like his stuff. Great humor. But I would look at that if I were you, Deb. His and Glenn Parker. I'll put that up there, too. I almost put Parker's book on my list, but it's not as virtual as I'd like it to be. Okay, I need to keep moving, but managing virtual distance on a project team. Hold face-to-face project kickoff meetings whenever possible. And in some of my interviews with the, did you just try it, Corey? Did it work?
Yep, it worked.
Excellent, excellent. The Thiagi one. All right. Hold face-to-face project kickoff meetings whenever possible. And in my interviews with DCRI people, I learned that DCRI is quite successful in getting sponsors to have face-to-face kickoff meetings. Most of you agree with that? Well, that's good to hear. Working in a CRO, it was tough to do it sometimes. They say, well, your CRO is too expensive anyway. Well, Duke ain't cheap. But if you're successful, I think it's good. Extremely important. A few things: conduct practical team building activities that get everyone involved. One of the best team building activities that I know of is identify risk together on a project, using some of the techniques I taught you last week. Extremely worthwhile. Share project goals and discuss team roles and responsibilities. Present the communication plan, involve team identifying and classifying risks, and agree upon team operating rules. Team operating rules. How many of you have formal team operating rules for your project teams? 1, 2, good. I'm going to come to you in just a minute. Areas where the team operating rules help: managing communications, establishing rules for expected performance, reporting project status, who's supposed to do what, who's supposed to report what, brainstorming, building consensus, problem solving, decision making, and managing conflict. The next two, here's a list. I'm not going to go through those. You have them printed. But it basically says this is how we operate. And there are a few in here that I think are extremely important. We'll support team decisions and the leadership of the PM. We'll fill our responsibilities on time with high quality. Treat all team members with mutual respect and courtesy. If you have these written down, everybody knows them. You go back over them periodically. People do know the rules of this game. Okay, now somebody who had their hands up, who hasn't talked about operating rules on your project.
I think our biggest one is just the mutual respect.
Yep.
And just being able to listen to everyone and take everyone's opinion and not make your biases.
Okay. Another one. Art?
Well, that the project itself is a learning opportunity for everybody, and that there's not only an opportunity to learn from the project and the activities of the project, but from each other and the different perspectives, the different ideas, solutions. So being open-minded, being willing to discuss things, letting others speak, certain sort of things.
Good. It helps manage the teleconferences because you can invoke the rules when people are really, really out of line. You're not picking on them. It's just not allowed. I'm going to have you look at this one for a minute, and we're going to do a little group exercise here. I'm going to go back to that slide. I'd like you to take one of these Post-it notes, and here are the two questions. I'll pass that to them. What I'd like you to do, and we're going to come back to these several times, communication. As it says on there, your most vexing problem with project communications. And then what you think is a solution. And buying a makeup mirror and hiring King Arthur might work, but probably not a solution. But take time to do this now. Think about it. Your most vexing problem of project communication, with project communication, excuse me. And now we're going to go back a slide. Communication technologies on virtual teams. we could spend a lot of time on communication technologies. And on that topic, this book, The Virtual Edge, by Marjorie Meyer, is very, very good, talking about technologies and how to use them. How to use specific technologies for what purpose. This slide came right after we talked about the team operating rules and the face-to-face kickoff meetings. It has to do with the various kinds of technologies that are available to you and choose the one that is the best for the situation. Now, I'm looking at the time. We've got lots to cover yet, but let's have three responses right now. Lisa, so go ahead and hand the mic to anyone. Which technology?
Maybe I missed the... Tell me again what you want.
What you wrote.
What I wrote, okay.
Your most vexing problem.
Most vexing problem, that's what I thought. Tremendous volume of email. It's on an international, global project with 1,100 enrolling sites. Tremendous volume of email, yet we sometimes, I put regularly, maybe sometimes don't get, or some people on the project don't get needed information. So it's kind of the push and pull of lots and lots of email, yet still sometimes people don't get information.
Okay, and I'm giving you, that's a magic wand. That's not a microphone. You're going to fix it.
So my best solution was to try to add more sense to having a communication plan around email to help people set boundaries that, we have a communication plan, but maybe some more work on that makes it more helpful in knowing what to send and to whom.
I would predict that a lot of you said too many emails. Some of the other solutions. Let's hear a solution. Somebody who had too many emails, what was your solution? I like your solution. You're working on the communication plan. Another email. Did you have email? How about behind her?
One solution was to do summary emails for the whole team and then individual one-on-one emails for the person who has the action item.
That's exactly what I was going to say is the number one thing that I've seen over the years that helps the most is a summary email, bulletin form that summarizes lots of things. Okay, now right behind you.
Can I just add something else along the same lines? What I wrote down was selecting the appropriate audience for the information. So making sure everyone's included, but not overloading everybody with things they really don't need to focus on.
Okay.
So mine was when you have a virtual team, in-house, folks get the opportunity to have their answers to their questions. Whereas then the whole team, even though they may be not necessarily in the same vicinity, either they're in-house, the whole team doesn't get the answer. And then especially for virtual folks, the answer is just to that person or to folks in-house, but we forget about the folks on the outside.
Okay, and how did you get the word to the people in-house?
Well, if the individual is whoever's giving the answer, you can give it to that individual face-to-face, but then go back and communicate to the whole team. And virtually, as I've done in the past, my communication was through email. Again, it's a summary email to the whole team, what that was. And then if there's a living document like an FAQ that we're doing for projects, that's something that's a global thing as well.
Good. And certainly the FAQs are a whole lot easier to work with now with web-based technology than they used to be trying to put them in Lotus Notes databases. Any of you ever done that?
I was along the lines of the FAQ wondering if, actually just using a blog.
Blog is good.
With updates and questions, and it's one central. I mean, and if there's a team website,
they can be categorized. It's good.
Website.
Team website is good. One more comment, and then I'm going to go to some of the technologies because I want to focus your thoughts on what's available. Any other answers on emails? Go ahead.
I would say to include the overview or summary of the emails in the next minutes that you have for your group, so that you can follow up and anybody can add any comments.
Yes. One of the things that we sometimes do in team meetings is we spend too much time reporting on status, and hey, that ought to be in the report, right? You ought to know that. Don't tell me how many sites, how many patients, etc., unless you're having a problem. Where are you? This is where you're supposed to be. This is where if you're having specific problems, then take it to lead CRA and then have her or him report. But don't take all the time doing this. I like what you just said about some summaries. I'm going to jump ahead here to this table. And this is when I put together, some of it comes from Karen Sobol-Lojeski. I didn't like some of her words were way too psychological, so I cleaned them up a bit, if you will. And I did attribute it to her, but I put this together. And if you think about communication, here are some facets of communication that are always important. This is the characteristic of these types of communications. Co-presence, and this goes back to her triangles, affinity distance, based upon her affinity distance. Here is a characteristic in the same space. The only one that works is face-to-face. Can see each other. It's important. Sometimes it's especially hearing another language. It's easier if you can see the people, see the mouth move. They're not always in sequence, but it does help. You see facial expressions. VidCon or Skype or face-to-face. You can hear each other, obviously. Telecon, webinar, VidCon, face-to-face. Here's an interesting one. Simultaneous or synchronous messaging. Real time. Telephone. I didn't agree with her on this one because I think because she put it down here, must talk in sequence. These two are so close, but talking at the same time or must talk in sequence, the important thing is the temporal nature. They are together and you're talking and receiving. Emails, yes, but not really, because you have to wait for them to respond unless you are doing instant messaging. And then this one can review and revise messages. Most important, how many of you have sent the wrong versions of emails? You're sorry you did. Extremely important. Remember the context. And if it's not happy talk, you might want to sit on it overnight, because people are going to be reading it at different times of day, different contexts, and you may not always get the response that you wanted. And then one other communication mode that I wanted you to look at is this one, and this one has to do with relatively, and this is one I've had for years, came from several sources, very, very well accepted. The effectiveness of the message in getting the message across, building relationships, and most importantly, the message being received the way you want it to be received. Face-to-face, going from the strongest to the weakest. Personal telephone call. And, by the way, jumping down here, why give project status reports in a teleconference? Nobody's going to pay attention anyway. They've got it in a report. Don't waste time doing that. But to get the results you want, go ahead. Okay.
It's true.
I agree.
I feel like we're killing a lot of trees for no reason in here.
All right.
And
good point. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, don't spend all the time just on status reports. Solve the problems, move through, exchange information. Don't let the clinical report, for example, take 90% of the meeting if you can put this in a summary email or in a status report. Very, very good point. I like that. Counter?
No counter. Just the second piece to it is we have teleconferences to allow people to talk, it seems, instead of to actually share information or exchange information. It's more to allow them to have been heard. And that's where the meetings get too long, ineffective, and virtually out of control.
Okay. Virtually out of control. In both ways.
Yeah.
In 2 dimensions. I like that. Okay. Finished with this one, and I'm going to jump right directly from what Viv said into another slide. But think of this when it comes to what do you want the message to do? Relative importance of the message. You want to be sure that it's heard, decoded, etc., and you're getting the right result from it. Think of this slide, think of this one, and then decide which mode you're going to use. Another vexing problem, communication. Anyone? Mark?
Trying to schedule meetings.
Trying to schedule meetings.
To get everyone in the room to have a face-to-face.
Okay.
Because, there's a lot of reasons that it's not easy, but...
I saw a Dilbert cartoon on this not too long ago. The first frame, 4 people were talking on the phone. One person posed a date. Next frame, the other person. No. Next frame, another person posed a date. No. Next person posed a date. No. Dilbert solved it. He said, "How about never?"
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens, it seems. Okay, how do you solve it? Ask Dilbert.
Well, a couple things. One, I think at DCRI, at least in Lotus Notes, not everybody shares their availability in Notes, and that can make it difficult because then you got to call and figure out whether or not they really are.
Yep.
I said ironically have fewer meetings in general.
Good.
Which would free up people's calendars for meetings that actually need to happen.
Sounds like that.
And then also, I think those were the 2 main ones. Just be more productive in meetings so that people want to come. I mean, if they're just there to hear a report, they're not going to come.
Let me see if we get to the right slide here. Virtual meetings, a challenge. I didn't actually do this slide until about the day before yesterday. Because I thought, trying to put it all, I did do it in 2 slides. And you know all the rules about how much information you can put on a slide and all that. I usually violate all of those. Because what I want to do is get people thinking. I don't want them to rate my slides. Take the slides away, put it somewhere. You might want to look back at it sometime. But so some of these are longer than they ought to be. Pick a time for meeting that inconvenience team members the least. Rotate times. You just talked about that. Very difficult to do. Virtual teams, time zones. Sometimes you have to propose times. Try to get the most people there. Rotate it as necessary. But part of your meeting rules, part of your operating rules should be about meetings if you're going to attend. And then another thing, I don't know if I put it in or not, keep meetings as short as possible and let team members leave if they're not needed for the entire session, especially in other time zones. They don't need to sit there all that time. If they're not needed, let them go. It's an agenda well ahead of time to meet time zone differences. The leader must run meetings more formally and proactively involved. Require everyone to identify themselves when they begin to speak. That's a little formal, but it really helps at the start of a meeting, especially if you got people coming in and out of meetings, and the fidelity not being always the best. It also helps people sort of tune their ears to the next person talking, especially in virtual teams with people from all over the globe having different accents, etc. It helps. Don't allow face-to-face team members to dominate the meeting or have sidebars in the meeting where they're all together. That is really, really destructive. We all know that one. Focus the subject, stay on schedule, deal firmly with any disruptions. Hard to do, but don't be cautious. I say be cautious, but don't be reluctant to do it. You are the leader, And by the way, rotate the leadership periodically to give your junior people some leadership opportunities. Choose a webinar over telecon with slides for training to keep people more engaged. Use email or IM to alert team members you're going to call on them if they're not on the schedule to give them time to prepare. Keep meetings as short as possible. And here's one that I'll share with you, International. A few years ago I was in Japan lecturing, and I'd been there 3 or 4 times that year, and I had two of the same 3 translators were the same. And it had probably been 6 months since I was last there. And I was really felt honored that day as they were setting up. This woman came up to me and she says, "Oh, Dr. Carlson, we're so happy to have you back. We love to translate for you." And I forgot exactly what her name was, but I repeated the greeting and said how happy I was to be back. And thank you for the compliment. Well, why do you? I am really touched by your compliment. Why do you say that? Just, because you speak slowly and give us time to think a bit. You don't use American slang English. And you never explain everything with American folk or with American sports analogies that we don't understand. I guess we would say she hit a home run there, right? So think about that. Sports analogies. Don't use sports analogies when you're talking to people from other countries, especially football. Most of the world doesn't even call what we do football. And we're wrong. Okay. Managing email on a project team. Time for another communication challenge. Anybody else that hasn't talked? Email that goes unanswered. Okay, let me jump ahead here. You do this, list any required action with due date in your email. We'll go back to that. I don't want to. Okay, go ahead. An email that goes unanswered. All right, what do you do about it? Solution.
I resend an email and put a deadline, like you said, and but sometimes still you don't get an answer, and make phone calls, and still you left a voicemail, and they don't call you back.
Is anybody there? Does anybody care? Then what do?
I copied the supervisor.
Call the supervisor. Good.
Sometimes I'll go to another phone where my name doesn't pop up, and they.
We just recently, as I said, had the Time Warner adventure, and now when the phone pops up, it doesn't say Douglas Call. It says Call in Warwick Project Partners. Who the hell are they? This must be some kind of a crank call, but it does get people to answer the phones more. Go ahead.
Just real quick on that. What do you do when you don't know someone's supervisor? I mean, lesson learned. I will never be on a project again not knowing the supervisor. But what do you do when you don't?
You've already learned.
How do you politely ask for someone's supervisor?
It may not be polite, but it may be necessary. Okay.
We have an org chart.
You have an org chart, yeah, but not always, especially if you're working cross companies with partners, etc. Yeah, you don't necessarily know. What you have to then is just go right straight to them and say, look, this isn't working on the phone. This isn't working. I need this information now. Tell me why it isn't working. And do we need to get your supervisor involved because I need it now? Viv, one more on this.
The other is to have an escalation plan.
Yep.
The escalation plan allows you to have everyone's escalation and backup, person to talk to. When I was working from a sponsor side with the CRO, we had an issue that we couldn't resolve at my level. And I was able to get another team member who worked in the same organization to say, okay, here's what the issue is. Who can I talk to and resolve this? So that was another methodology. If you can't necessarily find your sponsors or supervisors, you can find other team members that you can say, hey, I really need this, and I'm really having a difficult time. What can I do to resolve this?
Yes, I did have the escalation plan as really part of the communication plan that we slept over rather rapidly. But again, with all of your information on the slides, we don't have time to cover everything. Here is an example of when email is not communication. Did you read my long email? Not yet. What is it about? I can't say. If I tell you what I wrote it, the effort to put in a writing email will be transformed to a waste of time. I just decided to delete your email before reading it. Therefore, it's already wasted. You're now free to tell me its contents. Well, it was something about improving communication, but I worded it better. Maybe you should read it. Maybe you should read it. Very, very good summary of what we're talking about. Well, how should an email really be? I've tried to summarize here hints for more effective email communications. Subject line. Put what it's about in the subject line very concisely, and then repeat it in the first line. Make the top line your bottom line. Tell people right up front. And you all know when you're writing to people, further down you go, the less they're paying attention. Depending on how senior they are, they may not get past the subject line. Subject line delete, subject delete, subject delete. And then also you notice that the more senior the person, the shorter their emails. I got one from a boss one time that said, do it. Aye, aye. Okay. List any required actions with due date. Going back to what you asked. Add necessary background information. And then consider the context of the person, how they're going to be reading this. And on virtual teams, international teams, it really helps to say something nice, have some bit of pleasantry in there. A few years ago, I was in Milan, Italy, helping a pharma company with some communications and talking about these kinds of things. And I was going the next week to the headquarters of this pharma company in the U.S. And one young woman raised her hand. She said, "Paul, when you go to talk to your American colleagues in Bridgewater, New Jersey, would you tell them something for us?" Sure, I'd be happy to, but they're your colleagues, not my colleagues. Well, no, we don't want them. They're your colleagues now. And I said, okay. What would you like? He said, emails. Tell them when they send us emails, put a greeting on it. Don't just get into the message. We find that rude. And if they can't do that, at least somewhere in the message, say something nice. And she actually said this too. And don't say anything, and don't discuss anything about American politics or football. We don't care. So, very interesting. And that was probably 10 years ago. And I really remembered that well. Keep messages as short as possible. Time for one more. Vexing communication problem. Anybody else? Everybody solved? Steve, I haven't heard from you.
Yep. The problem that we faced was trying to understand why junior team members do not take their tasks seriously. Do I hear an amen, Jerry? I said understanding why junior team members do not take their tasks
It's
seriously.
generational time, folks.
Yeah, interestingly, Steve, that's what I was writing about.
Okay,
We're
go
on
ahead.
the same team.
Go ahead.
So one solution, if possible, is to do the face-to-face discussion and get to know the person a little bit more and try to convince them or encourage them of why their tasks are necessary and very pivotal in the whole scheme of things. And also during a telecon, forget about the reports and all those things for 15, 20 minutes, and just talk about the situation and encourage open discussion during those telecons.
Okay. Do you have anything to add about the generational seriousness, if you will?
Yeah, I guess I'll comment a little bit. So the biggest problem with communication is everybody having the same understanding. And so kind of how we solved some of what Steve's talking about is make sure we put it in writing, discuss with the staff, and then have, if it's really important, have them sign off on it, that they understand.
And I think that leads into this topic of building trust and engagement in a virtual team. I haven't talked a lot recently about this generational thing, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And there are differing approaches, to work. By generational approach. And the solution, who knows the solution, you have to find what works. But building trust and engagement in a virtual team, this of course applies not only in virtual teams, but these are some of the things you've got to do. Build identity and pride. Most of these we've already talked about. Visit other offices and bring team members together as possible. And one of the things that Jacqueline Costner said in her book way back in '94 that she learned that what Jim learned from Arthur was that Arthur told Jim, you need to go to your knights' castles. Don't always bring them to yours. So you see where they live, what they're doing, and if you're going to bring people together, bring them to somebody else's castle, not yours. So that they see the rest of the team, the rest of the knights that are there are coming to this castle and seeing how that virtual team member is working, that it works. No surprise, but very good suggestion. Enforce the communication plan for facilitating effective operations. We've talked about that one. Ensure team members are comfortable with technology. Correct any performance problems promptly. That's what we're talking about here. If you're not going to do it, folks, you're not going to get paid because you're not on the team. And I know it's not easy to get rid of people in the Duke University system, but go ahead. Courage, my friends, courage. Go ahead.
One of the things that I want to comment on, when you talk about ensuring the team members are comfortable with the technology. Mm-hmm. When Bart mentioned blog, I went, huh? I mean, again, I think you have to look at your team members, what their experiences are, and I think the generational aspect of that plays a big part.
Sure.
Certainly the younger ones are much more tech savvy. Those of us who, are part of the older generation certainly
you had
not.
Two hands to do things.
Exactly.
One wasn't texting, the other was smoking. So
right. Well, I wasn't.
No, that was
smoking,
Tara.
but still, and I think we do need to be aware of people's capabilities and make sure that the proper training is available so that everyone can use those. Sorry, Bart.
No, that's good. My daughter is a writer, and freelance writer. She just published her second book, and she also writes a lot of articles. And she has a website, and she also has, there's a click on there to go to the blog that she has people write in. And she did it for exactly what you're talking about, a generational thing, depending upon who is reading, where they want to go find things. And she also jokingly says, and for the old people, she puts it on the front page. No clicking required. Okay, identity and pride. Model the leadership behavior. We talked about that. Where'd our leaders go? There. Model the behavior you want. Demonstrate honesty, openness, and integrity in all actions. Treat everyone with respect and courtesy. Keep the focus on the mission. Do what you say you're going to do. When I was an officer, we were taught as a very junior officer, you never take off your stripes. They're always looking at you. So if you're a leader, you got to do it right. You got to, just like those of you that are parents, it's not do as I say, it's do as I do. With kids, it doesn't make any difference, right? They're going to do as they want. But team members sometimes the same, but yeah. All right, engage the team. Get team members actively involved in team telecons. Be friendly and open, so the team will share project concerns with you. Write pep talk emails to the team periodically. Conduct polls if necessary. If you're coming to the decision part, involve the team in decision making. Share news from their project sponsor, good and bad. People need to hear, especially those that are remote. What are they saying about us? How are we doing? And develop some kind of recognition and reward program, even if informal. I appreciate you, your emails. I appreciate you, cards, etc. Yeah, I just thought of something. A few years ago, I was in Germany, and I stopped in to see a woman who had been the European lead CRA, and then she was a European PM on the project that I had been project leader on. This would have been probably 5 years after the project was over. She'd been promoted and doing well, etc., and I stopped in to see her. And while we were chatting, I noticed on her bulletin board she had a card from me that I had sent her 5 years ago during the team when she got promoted up to being European lead CRA. And I said, Andrea, you still have that card. And I know this is in the third building since that time, so you've been in at least 3 offices. Why do you still have that card? Well, why would I not have that card? It's very important to me. When I got the job, I didn't think I could do it. And the next day I got this card from you, and then I knew I couldn't let you down. I was really touched by that. And she still had the card. So it's really amazing sometimes what small things do. Yeah. I'll send an email to Andrea and ask her if she still has it. I don't know, but I firmly believe in the power of the written word, handwritten if possible, in confidence, making people, you believe in them. Yeah, it was good. I like your question. Managing conflict on virtual teams. General thoughts. We're going to go through these fairly virtual. A lot of this we've covered. Teams require more heavily on trust among team members and co-located, and we've talked about why. Teams that communicate primarily by email often have more conflict than those who use multi-mode communication. Talked about that. When stress and pressure on the team is high, increase the personal contact. We're in this together. Conflict occurs during a team teleconference, take it offline. Do not allow it to go on. That's part of your operating rules. Remember, if a person brings it up, it's important to them. You may have to deal with it later, but don't just push it to the side. Yes?
When you say conflict, I mean, what if a person brings potentially like a Pandora's box that's directly affecting your project and may have multiple consequences down the road?
How can you say, I don't want to talk about it on the team conference when it could involve the whole team?
Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to hold that thought for a minute. Use the problem-solving cascade. This is something that I've used for years. In fact, I had, at various times, I've had copies of this thing. You remember back in the days when desks had pull-out, that board you could pull out? I either had it on that, or I had it in my center desk drawer, so I could look at it and remind myself when problems came in. And people would come in with a problem. What's the current situation or problem? What's the apparent source? What are they bringing? The important thing, and this is what I wanted to share with you, what's the real source? Because very often what you hear is not what is real. So before you jump on that one, be sure you have the real source, and that may not be able to be done immediately. It almost never is done immediately. What are the potential solutions involving the people involved? Which one is best? How are we going to implement it? And in clinical trials, it's time. Which one? There isn't time to do a win-win for everybody. Sometimes it's a lose and shut up and get on with it. And sometimes it's a, yeah, that was a great idea. Well, why didn't we think of this before? And then follow up. Be sure that it really was fixed. Other thoughts? Okay. Well, leading a project with a virtual team is a challenge, but it's also a great source of satisfaction. In fact, leading a project with a successful team is, regardless of where they are, it's a source of great satisfaction. And we were supposed to be done about this time. I have laid out here some references for you. I've given you the references here that I've used, and I've probably talked a good bit about the individual references. And just sort of a final bit. And by the way, here is a very good blog on virtual teams. Very good blog, just for you, Bart. Okay, I like that one. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And then sort of as a summary of this all is, usually after you go to training like this, when all is said and done, usually a lot more said than done. You're going to go back to reality in a few minutes, and I wish you well with that reality. But put a lot of time into writing these slides in such a way that you can go back to it. I'm even brave enough to put my phone number there and email. And I'll even get it in Argentina next week if you write to me next week. So thanks for your attention. Again, I enjoyed seeing all of you and hope to see more of you in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.